Okay, item 2, updates and discussion. 2A, current programming on public access and local or origination channels, best use of these channels and role of the Cable Franchise and Hearing Board. Can you speak to that?
I can.
Well, that would be beautiful.
I think that's what I'm here to do.
Excellent.
Could I do it from here, or where would you like me?
Well, first let me introduce myself, which we tried to get
You
together.
tried, Brian.
Very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Mike and I got together.
Yes, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. So, I'll sit again. A lot of this is fresh. I've freshly rehearsed because I got to meet earlier with our partners at Quote Unquote, and I can happily say that we are partners now. We got through the whole contract process, and so we had our really first kind of operational meeting, if you would, today for their party to the PEG channels, right? Them being 4, right? Being the education access, what we're now calling local origination, public access, and GovTV, right? And so what's cool about Quote Unquote is that they are the sole programmers of that particular channel. So putting together, just coordinating processes and procedures with them should be easier. But you know, when I was here maybe 2 meetings ago now, or so which makes it like 4 months ago now, you know, we were plugging through a lot of our technical transitions for moving it from the previous kind of, I call it a winner takes all provider in New Public. And then after we terminated their contract in April of this year, we had high hopes and ambitions of being able to just flick a switch and then kind of be in our figuring out of how we have to administer and operate the channels. And then we spent all summer getting the technical pieces in place, right? And so we're close to flicking the switch now. When I say flick the switch, it means the current way that the channels are being populated with content is through a kind of jerry-rigged multi-tricaster system. And essentially it's just programming the same thing on all the channels just so that they're not dark. And that was a decision that we made with the administration, because it was like either just go dark and it's nothing until we get it figured out, or we populate it with something. But once we flick the switch with Comcast, then we are now the master control. The city takes full ownership of master control. And what we've been spending the fall doing is getting the contracts in place so that we can actually handle that. You know, in my meeting with Nancy, Brian was the only one I've not been able to meet one-on-one with yet. A lot of her concerns were around our capacity. We know our capacity very well. We know we can do the technical component for 4 channels. We cannot provide content. Like, we don't have the people, we don't have the money through the city for the general fund to hire more people to do it. So we have to do that work through contracts and partnerships. So Quote Unquote is the operator of that educational access channel, or I shouldn't say operator, that's old terminology. We're the operator, but they are the content providers for that channel. The public access channel contract is almost executed with Windfire Media, who is a local production outfit in town. Currently they do a lot of live events, most notably programming that they do with the closed circuit television for Isotopes, right? And then they also do the closed circuit, or actually the live stream for Balloon Fiesta. And so they're gonna be the operators of public access, meaning protect the city's investment in equipment, because we learned with the last provider that we weren't doing a good job protecting the city's investment in equipment. And so they'll be doing that, as well as some programming as guided by the city, but mainly they're just supposed to keep the studio open, let people use the content, create media, that content goes to air, we put it on the air. Local origination is probably the newest incarnation, because that's not just one person manages the channel or provides content for a channel, that's multiple providers, and currently I guess half of that time right now is a contract that we have with ProView. And then, you know, our intention is to continue to fill up that programming calendar with other folks that can provide a significant amount of polished content. That's just way hands off for the city. Like, those people will be able to just drop some content and we put it on the air, as opposed to a public access. We have to facilitate them making the content to go on the air. And then GovTV will be what GovTV was, with a new name, soon to be One Albuquerque Media. But GovTV also has the benefit of having contractors and staff that now we can use in those other 3 channel spaces as well. So it gives us a lot more capacity to handle the technical end of things, and then really let the people that we contract with focus on making the content, right? And so that's where we are. As I said, it took us a while to figure out the what do they call it, the fiber that was that gets you on the air with Comcast. We had to reroute to City Hall, and that didn't happen as fast as we'd liked. And there were other things that were party to the franchise agreement that we were working out that are exciting, like video on demand is coming soon, and things like that. And so, yeah, I think in city government everything takes longer than you think. But,
you just renamed your contractor for public access again? I didn't quite catch it.
Windfire. Windfire Media. W-I-N, I want to say D-F-I-R-E. It's Windfire, not Windfire.
Mm-hmm.
The
and
development
contract's in place then?
It's almost in place.
Okay.
That contract, because of the size, I believe, has to go to council. So we're going through that kind of schlag. I think hopefully it'll be introduced at the next council meeting, and then they'll be on shortly thereafter. Yes, I'm assuming that's right. They may have. You know what? I take that back. We gave them keys, so I think their contract is through. I'm confusing it with ProView's lease.
Okay.
Because currently in 519, switch subjects, in 519, you know, in this transition, it was also brought to our attention that in the past, we kind of were just, we would have let whoever the RFP winner was live there, and things weren't happening that were also not protecting the city's interest in the property itself. And so, you know, things like fire alarms and things that really put us in a position of not being safe at times. And so at the end of the day, we realized that if we really need to take care of these buildings, then we have to take care of these buildings. The best way for the city to take care of the buildings and to keep those things current instead of just passing that buck on to the contractor is to live there. And so in the time since you saw me last, we've staffed up 2 more people. One person that is a city employee that is in the front office there, that's a studio manager. That person will kind of be the city's presence at the site all the time. And then you in the back on that bottom floor, you'll have Windfire doing their public access stuff. And upstairs, we actually have given ProView some space, right, for them to operate out of. Mainly more of their administrative work, but also for them to store equipment. There's some editing bays up there. And we figured out a process. We worked with them to create a contract that was sort of a rent abatement contract. So in exchange for staying there, there's an actual lease that we had to draw up, and that's what's going to council. Or either was already introduced and going to council, because the annual rent exceeds a certain amount. The annual cost of the rent, the actual market rate of the rent exceeds a certain amount, and then we've made an agreement with them for additional services that they will provide the city to offset that rent, to put them in a space where they're not drowning. And so that lease is actually going to city council hopefully the next meeting.
Awesome. Could you be kind enough at our next meeting to bring what is current or the future looking flow chart, operational flow chart of the whole PEG system?
I certainly can. I think I brought one to my 4 months ago when I came, the last meeting I came to. It has changed significantly since then.
I'm sure, yeah.
So I will update it, and I'd be happy to share. And I can share it with you guys before the meeting. I could probably share it with you by the end of the week, but I'll get it out to the cable board.
Awesome.
That's no problem.
I personally would appreciate that. And
what I will say, for just the benefit of our guests who are here and for the public, in the time since I was here last, we've also got a link live that Diego's supposed to be sending me. What I learned when I was here last is that, you know, yeah, we got our head down and we're working, but we're not telling our story very well. And so, unless you call us, and then we're happy to tell you our story, but it's not like we were doing a lot of telling. And some of it because it was so transitional that, you know, if all you're telling is I don't know, people don't want to hear that either. So now we know stuff, right? And so if you go to our site at cabq.gov, cultural services, I want to make sure I have all of it here. You should be able to find we have a PEG access kind of sub-page, and it has things like folks can already begin submitting content ideas. It got a brief history of public access, a little text, and these aren't the flow charts, but a little text about the direction we want to be going in, and we just decided to try to figure out how to put that out there so we could minimize some of the phone calls and emails, but still be responsive to the community.
Awesome.
So, Hakeem, one thing you talked about 4 months ago was the advisory function.
Yes.
That you wanted to have some kind of an advisory function. Conversation ensued that this board might step in and help serve that advisory function. Where does that stand in your plan?
It's still the direction we want to go in, and we've kind of been drowning in the technical details. But yeah, I was hoping, I know I have one more one-on-one with Brian, and I learned lots of things from my meetings already with Michael and Nancy about possible programming ideas and other things. But I think our next step, like once we flick the switch and now we're live, we know that you guys have served the role in the past to kind of receive compliments and complaints, mainly complaints. When people they would bring them to this body, we definitely see a more advisory role, like not on just the receiving end, but proactively on what are we doing in the next 4 months, what are we doing in the next 6 months, and really providing that capacity to the city again. I will say a new development though, because this is where we were a little bit in limbo, is we didn't know what the future process was going to be for requesting PEG funds. Because of what happened in the past, we were tasked by the administration with finding up a new process for that, and it's been lots of things in the past. There's been the IPEG committee, there's been the CAO's signature and discretion, there's been the COO's signature and discretion, and we have a recommendation essentially to the COO's office for a new process that is a hybrid of both of those, that is both a committee that may or may not be this body, I think we still have to figure that out, that would see those purchase requests up front and provides another another line of like oversight and protection for us before they go to the COO for like a final approval. And a lot of that is at the CAO's, his vision is that if we do it that way, we're looking at what purchases we want to make preventatively, as opposed to wait till something breaks and now it's an emergency and we need to purchase like yesterday. And so how do we use the expertise of that committee to kind of decide how we buy stuff before it breaks, essentially, hoping to save taxpayers money in the long run. Part of that request is also to say, how do we draw down a little bit more from the PEG fund on an annual basis? Because we're doing more, frankly. And that was sort of the implicit conversation we were having with folks like, quote unquote, is like, we want to be able to get more equipment, because if we say we're going to take over this technical piece, we have more things that we're trying to do, and so we don't want our limitations on equipment to get in the way of us being a better master control or a better technical provider. So all those things are in play at the same time.
In terms of, so obviously you're programming, you want to meet needs. Where in all this machinery is there some kind of ascertainment of needs? So you've got some idea of what the needs are.
Michael, that's a great question. And I think that could be an awesome role for me. Is that being a role in the cable board? Like, are we using the site we've already created? Are we receiving or pushing out some sorts of needs assessment every now and then? The way I understand it now, having been 2 years into this, is that we ask for that stuff. We often ask for Nielsen from Comcast, and they're like, yeah, we'll get it to you, and we don't get it. So it's like, how do we create our own mechanism for gauging what's out there? And we haven't done it in the past, and it would be great to do that moving forward. It's kind of like not waiting until people have issues and then come to this body, but kind of always having a pulse of what's happening out there. And there's probably better ideas out there than we have. So.
Wasn't there some kind of a clause in the contract?
Yes, definitely. In the Comcast franchise ordinance, we work very hard to get customer ascertainment every, let's see, so this will be at the sole expense of the grantee. They have to undertake a survey of community views every 2 years. So that would be in June of 2021. So that one thing that the city government can do, cable board can do is develop a timeline working up to May 2021, so that when May 2021 comes, we already, the city, the board, cultural services already has kind of a plan in place. Like, under this ordinance, the city can recommend a type of survey, and who should be surveyed, how should be surveyed. You can think about maybe the weak points in the whole system for the survey. For example, if a lot of people are complaining about a particular aspect of public access, then you would maybe focus the survey questions on that. Anyway, but it's always good to be proactive if we only have the time. But this is section 8 in programming.
Is that new, Jane? That's new for this franchise agreement. They didn't have to do it in the past, but now they
Right,
have
this
to do
is
it.
new, right, so
Awesome.
we have to come up with a way of doing it, right, because it hasn't been done in the past.
Sure. And we would love the cable board's help with that. I just feel like the cable board and the folks that come to these meetings have a better sense of, I feel like oftentimes it's either people who are producing media who care, or it's somebody who's a consumer of media and all of a sudden they see something that they don't like or something that doesn't work for them, and that's when things come to us. It would be great if there's a whole bunch of people in between that care, but we never talk to them, and now we can actually be in communication with them and find out what their needs are too. The only needs aren't, hey, my cable went out, or hey, my stuff's not getting on the air. There are other needs and other services that we're supposed to be providing.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we're not doing tonight is talking about some of the information needs of the community. We're going to pump that to next time. It's something I was preparing, but there's a lot there.
And we got to talk about, Mike and I got to talk about news, which is, honestly a personal passion of mine. And so, there's been other conversations in City Hall about how do you do that, or how do we provide a community a place to do that. We already do our news. The city's news is on GovTV. The things we want people to know, we tell those stories. But how do you create a dialogue around information in the community? I think we're always trying to do that. Public radio is trying to do that. All the other spaces and platforms are trying to do the same thing. Maybe all except for the internet, maybe. So.
So the city can bring up the community demands, and that's a term of art in the federal law as it applies to public access and cable television. So that any cable provider is required by federal law to always meet the cable-related needs of the community. And so the city, under this ordinance, and another part of it, can call for interim assessments. And so that is something the city can do with the results of the survey. Now, under the law, the city cannot make specific demands on programming because that would be interference with the First Amendment rights of Comcast. However, it can make, I would call them demands on broad categories of programming. So, for example, local news programming would be a broad category that the city could, through a survey or through other means, show Comcast that the cable networks or the cable network is not meeting the community related cable needs. So that's something that could be a whole campaign of this board.
Got it.
Using all the tools, and the legal tools, the community outreach tools, all of them.
Well, it sounds like some congratulations are in order for progress being made, and
Not for me, but for our team, thank you. I really feel like our technical guys, once the franchise agreement was done, I gotta give Comcast credit. We told them what we wanted to do, and they were like, do you know what you're doing? And we were like, no, that's why we're asking you. And then they worked really hard. I mean, all the director and I are supposed to do is to really listen to our team tell us, hey, you gotta hire 3 more people if you wanna make this thing work. And then us to get that through. And we actually just hired the last guy he has a name. His name's not Master Control. His name's Will, and Will's got through new employee orientation. And so that, to me, as I was telling quote unquote earlier, I said we've been talking about this for a while, and it's just starting to feel real. Once you start hiring people and training people, it feels like it's starting to feel real. So.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. Wonderful. Any other discussion, questions?
Good for the moment.
Okay, I am too. Let's move on to the third one.
Thank you, Michael.
B will be moved to our next meeting under the agenda. And if, Jane, if you could work with the city building group to find out how to connect an outside computer to their computer, or to, if you had it on a thumb drive,
Yeah. we
load a
have to,
thumb drive.
Yeah, you need a projector, right? So we'll
Yeah,
get
just-
that. Sorry, I didn't talk with you, otherwise I could have done it.
I
Sorry.
should have checked, yeah, no problem.
C, Comcast franchise implementation issues. Summary of consumer complaints received by city and from Comcast, if available. Have we gotten anything from them?
Well, you're having better luck than I am communicating with Comcast, because I have asked them for some of these compliance materials, and I haven't, nobody is answering me. I've emailed the attorney and the local, staff here, Aaron and.
Yeah,
and,
Aaron's, we've been working with Aaron, and who's the regional, he never
Chris
comes to the meeting.
Duncanson.
But he never comes, but the person who's under him, whose name, a woman whose name I cannot recall right now, but.
Oh, Julianne.
Julianne,
Ferris.
yeah, that's who we've been dealing with, Julianne and Aaron, and then they've been they've worked with Chris to get the technical support we need,
Mm-hmm.
but I can try if you think it's useful.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be great.
Okay, well, that says that. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll move to the public comment. Simon, would you like to say a few things?
Well, I thought it was very interesting when Ms. Yee said, that they couldn't censor content because that would be a violation of First Amendment rights. That was the first thing I found out when the last provider, manager of public access, I was told they would decide what would be considered as content. So they immediately said they would censor. I found that very interesting. That went on for 6 years. And then I'm interested in the process of how this firm Wind Fire, how they were contracted, if this was out to public bid, and what their expertise is. I'd be interested in finding out how that process was undertaken and why they were chosen and so on. I'd like to find that out. And if the last manager of public access didn't provide the services they were supposed to, I think the city should file suit against them and demand monies back and maybe damages, because I worked in construction, and if a subcontractor or a contractor didn't provide what they said they were going to, they were sued. People would take them to court. And this has been going on for 6 years plus now, I believe. And then interference. They're asking you for advice, and the last time before the last public access contractor was hired, the cable board recommended somebody other than them, and the chief administration officer disregarded the cable board's access. So are they going to take you seriously or not seriously? And then again, Nancy, I asked her when she first came, the problem was with the prior member of the cable board. She never showed up. And now this person who is provided by the present administration is not here, and she took it as an insult for me, because I asked her, how seriously are you taking this job? And she's not here. And so I wonder, what's the process for a board member? Because I know of somebody who provided city council a resume and asked to be a board member and provided a resume, you know, and with experience and so on, and it was totally disregarded. So what's going to be the process to find a third board member that will attend these meetings, that
Or
will listen to the...
for that matter.
Pardon?
Well, we're talking about expanding the board, so the
Well,
question
yeah,
could be extended.
and, you know, how serious we should, you know, hopefully they'll find somebody serious enough. I mean, my hat's off to Mr. White, he has been here every time I've been here, and at work they say 90% of the job is showing up. And if you don't show up, what good are you? So, you know, we need, the public needs people that will show up and take this job serious, this, you know, I know, you know, it's public service, this seriously. So that's, you know, I have a bunch of questions, so I like to hear them, or hopefully next time, you know, some answers provided, or explanations about, you know, why has it come to pass as this? And I think it's great about local news, and I knew people that were involved in local news, and again, this is public access. How professional is this supposed to be? I mean, I know people that are involved in community theater, and most of the people involved are amateurs. Now, yes, they get help from professionals, but it's community theater. I mean, it's not on the professional level. And people go and they try to enjoy it, and they try to get something out of it, and they do their best. And a lot of times it falls short, most of the time it falls short of what you would expect from a real professional, but they're involved. And my whole thing about public access is you try to get people involved no matter what level, and hopefully they become better at it, or they go, well, maybe this isn't for me, but it's just public access.
Partly the training function.
Yeah, it's just public, and then I hear rumors about C&M and all sorts of rumors, and I don't know what's going on. But to me, it's always going to be public access for, let's say somebody myself, I don't want to be a professional videographer, I don't want to be a professional camera person, I don't want to be a professional editor, blah, blah, this. But I'd like the opportunity to have public access.
So I don't know, is it appropriate to turn to Hakeem at least for one of those answers?
Sure.
How did you end up with Windfire, and
Sure.
what's your kind of approach in terms of public access at this
And
point?
what's the position, you know, what's the cable board?
Well, that's in flux.
I mean, if the last administration...
First of all, we expect,
Yeah.
this is not really for public announcement, but word is Nancy may have been hired away from us, and we may have to replace her. That's pending. And the discussion about expanding the cable board is part of a larger conversation.
Well, I think that's for you people, that's very pertinent. What is your position? I mean, what does administration want from you, and what can we, the public, expect from you?
I'll quickly answer that. I see public access as a tool, one of many ways to serve the community, and that is basically to tool them up if they're looking for, training to get their hands on technology and be comfortable with technology and get better at technology. It's a very accessible, city-provided way to do that. I don't think it's about building audience necessarily. It comes down to individual free speech and giving people an access to the soapbox. So there's pretty much a kind of a hands-off, but at the same time, some people might really want some guidance, some training. They might want to be critiqued and that sort of thing. I personally think there are appropriate taste and ethical constraints on public access that we need to be mindful of community standards. And so somebody's operating a public access channel is going to, have to be somewhat of a, regulator of that. But it should be, to me, on the larger philosophical level, we should be trying to reflect the community, try to open the doors and let voices in. I think it's a little more about serving the messenger than the public, but it's both. It's both. The public soapbox. It's not a commercial enterprise. It's a public service enterprise.
Correct.
Thank you.
I would ditto that. The other issue that he kind of touched on, and that is whoever's making the decisions for what's to air and what isn't to air. And if there's an issue where the provider is saying no to the producer, you can't put that on any channel, and he had good reasons, is there a place for them to come to? And may I recommend that's this board?
Yes, me too. I agree. We don't want to be in the what aired and what didn't air, or in the refereeing why it did or didn't air. But yeah, somebody who's what we would like to see, just to be honest, is somebody who repeatedly ends up in front of this board. Yeah. They're no longer a city contractor. Like that's just like that person is now providing an obstacle to access instead of a vehicle for access. And
sure.
There was no way, much like this awesome thing that Jane and our attorneys argued for in the cable franchise, there was no way to get that kind of feedback, concrete feedback. I mean, there were plenty of calls, I'm sure, that went to my predecessor about how I'm not getting all the air, but if you weren't really measuring it, because that's what you need to go to whatever you need to go to. I mean, the city usually has we can separate from the contract, but needing documentation is how the city protects itself from any countersuits. And I just think that if we're good at documenting that, and that's where I think this body can help us out. Like they end up in here a certain number of times. The recommendation from this body is to say, hey, they're not doing what you've asked them to do. We have your contract with them. They're not meeting it. We think you should dismiss them. We would dismiss them.
Well, and on the same side of the coin, if the contractors have guidelines, if the city, the city, I'll use you as the city.
The proxy.
Gives them guidelines as to what can and cannot be programming on PEG. Certain indecent material. Ethically not appropriate could be somewhere construed to be maybe a 50-50, but that's something the city should probably have a hand in saying, this is right, this is wrong. And if you do come to that situation, I would very much, the board would probably appreciate seeing those guidelines.
Sure. And yes, both and. So we are developing, because we're not quite there yet, but we are developing, in tandem with the public access folks, would it be a producer's manual or something in training that advises people what is allowable and what isn't. But that is public facing. They still bring their content to the contract holder, and then the contractor gives it to us to put on the air. We don't want the city to be in a space where we are looking at that before we put it on the air to decide if we don't want to be in that space. Right. So we're gonna air it as long as it doesn't, it's not hate speech, doesn't infringe upon anyone's civil rights. All that is already federally protected. But yes, usually either we'll catch it, because we are going to be doing periodic monitoring of content, mainly just to make sure stuff airs when it's supposed to air. But yeah, occasionally our folks will catch a political ad, or something that's a paid advertisement that the person made for someone else and they forgot to cut it off before it got to us. And that'll be as it was before. Sometimes the community will catch it before we do and we'll get a call. Sometimes we'll catch it first. But in the past, that just nobody was tallying that. And I think for repeat offenses, it should end up in some sort of, I don't want to say action.
Awesome.
Some sort of action, and they were just not hard. And there were rules, but there was no one tracking to see if we were able to violate the rules on a frequent basis. We were playing incoming. We were defending. We were trying just to answer all the questions as they came instead of putting something in place to say we're going to monitor too. And I've learned that even with Comcast, they'll say, somebody will tell us our signal was off the air, and they'll say we knew it was off the air. And it's like, well, why didn't you tell us it was off the air, right? You know, we thought you wanted it that way. And so we were like, let's come up with a better process for this. And so those are the things that, you know, we're hoping that this fixes. We don't know, but our intention is to fix those kind of things.
I love your plan. It's terrific.
Thanks.
I really do. It's, after hearing years, Jane, of negative comments, it's kind of nice to hear some positive things moving forward. So
I want to address what Simon said, because there's no secrets. The last RFP, okay, let me take you back 2 RFPs ago, when it was still winner take all, was before the city settled with quote unquote. Once the city settled with quote unquote, it was a fundamentally different RFP, and we reissued it, right? In reissuing it, we felt that's when we first began to visualize these big changes to the structure, and it went out as actually 2 separate RFPs, one for local origination, one for public access instead of winner take all, and then educational access already was quote unquote, right? That was already in the works. And so since the public access contract failed and there wasn't a, I forget what they call it.
Responsive.
Thank you, unresponsive, thank you, Jane. It was unresponsive. Our purchasing rules say that we can go direct to market and find someone to fill that need because the city needs that need filled. And so that's how we ended up pretty much asking around to figure out who could do it for us, frankly in a pinch, until the city can figure out what it wants to do next, if it wants to issue another RFP in the future or not. And so those rumors you heard weren't rumors. We did ask around. We went to CNN. They said, sounds like a cool project. We don't have the capacity to do it right now. Maybe let's partner in the future. And it was like, okay, but that doesn't help us out right now. And we met with a few folks before we landed on Windfire, mainly just because of their capacity to do it. Like they have a staff and a team of people that can man a studio, and we don't have, even with the people we hired, we still don't have enough people to man a studio. And their contract is a year. The current guidelines say you can contract for a year and then you can reevaluate it to figure out if you like it or not. So we got them in a contract that's a year plus 1 if we like it or not. But there's still a question out there of, are you going to continue to do this? Are you going to issue a new RFP? If you issue a new RFP, so many things have changed that it has to be a really different RFP.
But then they would be held accountable to that same process of being brought in front of the cable board for not providing the service that they're supposed to be providing.
Yeah, if they were out of compliance, but if it was just like, we tried it and it didn't work, we don't want to do it again, we just let their contract lapse.
got another? Yes, Colleen. Colleen?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
She's been typing away.
Oh yeah, just taking notes. Yes, I met with Hakeem today, and the contract for Ed Access was signed on the 13th. We have spent some time and money working on the programming policies, because that's part of the contract, is to help the city develop the programming policies. And some issues have sort of come up with as we've outreach for content and had people fill out programming forms. Some people have said they're fine with putting content onto the channel, but they don't want it on the internet. And so we have in our contract that says streaming and streaming platforms making it available online and archiving it and finding ways to archive the content. So I was looking at finding ways to develop a video on demand platform. So I think just working on the policies so it kind of breaks it up so people can say, yes, I do want it online, yes, I want it on the channel, and kind of making it clear to people this is going to be here, this is going to be here, and the city is going to have this content for the duration of our contract for archival purposes. No, they're going to have the content into perpetuity, but they'll be able to broadcast this for the duration of our contract plus 18 months. So it's just a matter of reaching out and updating that with people to work on programming. So I'm trying to work as a content aggregator to pull in content from people. Our contract provides no operational funding, which is hard. I'll be doing this as a volunteer executive director until I can bring in some funding, and I am looking at different ways to do that. I do have I spoke with Shannon Pinto and Representative Christine Trujillo, so they're working on a bill for $400,000 in operational funding at the state level to provide to the channel. And if we can keep that alive for 3 years in a row, then that can actually become a permanent line item. And I updated the governor on that information, and I've been working with the pueblos and tribes of New Mexico and talking with Navajo Nation Broadcasting about creating community access media pods and finding ways to share content and support the uniqueness of our New Mexico cultures, and to provide, educational and informative information that can support language and cultural preservation and revitalization. I do want to work with ProView Networks to cover tribal sports and arts, but also working with educational institutions. We worked with RFK Charter School, and they were able to build out a radio station for us, and they have hired staff, and we're providing community radio training for free to the public because of that partnership. And we provided that to the Pueblo Isleta at-risk youth and to South Valley Academy students. So I just use them as a model for what we'd like to do to decentralize and work with community members, with nonprofits, and we updated our bylaws to include that we definitely want to serve underrepresented and underserved communities, in part because we definitely want to highlight the voices of people with disabilities, but also because at one point we were one of 2 TV stations in the country that actually had people with disabilities who produced their own shows. It was by and for people, the community, and also I think other voices that are not heard. I believe, being able to focus on programs and productions that include immigrants, because our community has a lot of new immigrants from a lot of different places, and their voices are not being heard. And as a Native American, seeing the issues in this community, that I think a big part of the problem is the fact that in the past we haven't really had a voice. And so as a Native American leader of this organization, I really do want to support people who haven't had their voices heard and don't have that voice, because it's important, because if there's no voice, the squeaky wheel is what gets the oil. And so being able to allow a diversity of voices to be on the channel and to celebrate the uniqueness of our culture and preserve it, because my grandmother, who's 104, she just passed away. Hakeem was able to meet her, and she is the last one in my family who only speaks Navajo. Everybody here on out is bilingual, and that's across the board for many languages, and so it needs to be a proactive step. And if we lose the languages and the cultures here in New Mexico, then we're not going to be unique. We're going to lose the cultural tourism, which the city and the state really receives, gets a lot of tourism on that. But also it's just something important, because we've been here for longer than the United States of America. And so I'm really excited that the Governor Matt Zuni asked us to connect with tourism people from DC, because they're going to have an indigenous tourism forum of the Americas. People are coming from Peru and Brazil, and he would like for us to cover that over at the casino, and I'm hoping that maybe that contract can bring in a little bit of funding. ProView Networks, the Steve Davis is Choctaw. He's an enrolled member of the Choctaw tribe, so he's really excited about supporting indigenous media and finding ways to cover tribal sports and to work with me on that. And I'm excited to work with Navajo Nation Broadcasting to see about content sharing to help us fill those 84 hours a week that we need. And that's a lot, you know, so with our funding being so limited, I am going to be doing this as a volunteer. The board did ask me to work part-time last year, and I did hire staff, and I set up a lot of infrastructure so that we could get the process going and start receiving content. But I was amazed at how, well, just, you know, the payroll is the biggest expense for any company. Right, and I was really surprised about that. I was surprised about that too, the negotiation with the city. I actually purchased our services with Telview back in August because I thought we would have a contract finalized by then, but I'm really glad. I feel really positive about us being able to sign the contract and that we were able to advocate to support freedom of speech and to point out where there were opportunities for government censorship so that we could protect producers and the ability to be able to create and put content onto the channel. And so now, you know, just looking at finding ways to also support making sure our programming policies are balanced and even and protect the public's rights, but also protect the organization and the city, because I definitely, like Hakeem said, you know, hate speech. I mean, there's freedom of speech, and in the political climate of today, freedom of speech has been used as a tool to protect hate speech. So that's a really fine line to walk. And I definitely want to protect, if anybody, protect staff and people from violence. You know, if somebody's inciting violence against staff or whatnot, because I believe that happened with Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and the case that went to Supreme Court. So there's a lot of things that I'm thinking about and just looking at the big picture and trying to make things happen. I really want to work with Windfire, with Gary, to find a way to get people trained and support through educational access and public access, support a pipeline to the film and television industry, to support educators getting their career technical education certification. I'm a certified teacher for high school, so I learned a lot as a teacher about jumping through the hoops to get certified and what it takes. And so I definitely look forward to working with schools and educators. And again, I have to think about, you know, releases and permission forms, especially if, you know, working with K-12, and then at the post-secondary level, thinking about, you know, educators and students who want to exercise their freedom of speech. So I really feel like educational access is a different kind of beast. It's new grounds. It's challenging because in some, you know, our focus is educational access, content is educational, informative, but there's no legal description specifically about what is educational. And, you know, and if we are working with educational institutions, then, you know, educators and students, they should have the right to exercise their freedom of speech, and maybe it's just student work that's being showcased and it has nothing to do with anything that's educational, but it's still student work. So educational access is definitely a new, for me, it's just something like an idea that I'm really I've been thinking about for a long time, and how to make it work.
1 second. Do you currently know of or have any green material programming that could be presented to the current PEG channel operators?
Green content, you mean regarding environmental content? Like
Green
environmental
meaning
issues?
it can run anytime,
Evergreen.
generic.
Oh, evergreen. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
evergreen.
yes. Yeah. There's some. I'm pretty sure there's some evergreen content. I can't think off the top of my head. We've had a lot of content submitted. Sue Skirman reached out, did a lot of outreach to get content. So now I had to let her go because our funding is so low. So I really have to take the time to review what has been submitted so we can start scheduling it and putting it out there.
Well, it might be that kind of, presenting it and getting it aired now
Right.
might be kind of a stepping stone to getting more funding.
Right.
When people start seeing the value, go to your network, say, did you see this? Please watch this. It's coming on at this time, blah, blah, blah. And if you like it, bring it to the attention of
Right, and that,
Right.
whoever, the
and that's what
providers.
and that's what quote unquote is doing is it's developing a valuable educational channel for the city with no operational fundings from the city, with access to equipment that the city owns. So the city's talking about requesting more money because they're doing more, but at the same time not offering any of that funding to the educational channel, who is, like Colleen's saying, being asked to be a content aggregator, but at the same time developing policies with the city and contributing valuable intellectual content and experience with the compensation of having access to a broadcast channel.
Right.
And which is very valuable, but at the same time we're not able to sell any kind of advertising to generate funding, but we can try and get some underwriting, but that takes
a little bit of
funding
time.
and
I think
expense.
the membership
Yeah.
model in the past has been the way that public access
Right.
have been able to bring in some funding, some income. So this is definitely new territory because trying to consider if I'm selling a membership to educational access, then what are the rights of the members? And I brought this up with the board at a few board meetings to get them thinking about this because it's important to consider, if someone gives me content and I don't have any money to put it I need content definitely to meet my obligations, but it takes time to review it, to make sure there's no salacious material on it, to make sure there's no, to make sure it's kosher, and then to transcode it and ingest the content and send it over to the city. And so it's going to take time, and I do plan to utilize internships, paid internships through different programs and partnerships, things like that. So I think that'll definitely help because I want to definitely utilize an army of interns to help me with this, and volunteers. But I know volunteers also need to people need to put food on the table, and people want to be working to put away their Social Security and for their end of their working life, and that's something to take into consideration. So. I'm really trying to look at how and what type of membership model and educational aspect, is it going to be training? I think training is one way that quote unquote has been able to bring in bread and butter in the past, and so that's definitely something I'm looking at to try, and I'm looking at developing a business plan based on those different things, and also trying to get as many producers trained so that we can subcontract. If we get a contract, because the Pueblo of Isleta, they really want us to produce that and simulcast that indigenous form of the Americas, the tourism form of the Americas. And so I want to be able to take people with me and provide opportunities for people. So if somebody knows how to use equipment and we get a contract to cover something and it's fulfilling our programming obligations, but it's also putting food on the table for people, I want to do that. And so I think that in this new day and age, having an entrepreneur's mindset is really important, and that's my degree, and my background is in organizational management with entrepreneurial concentration. I think in the past, the former leadership, there was some of that, but because quote unquote was pass and go and collecting the $200, that innovation wasn't there as much. And so when the contract was pulled out from under us, the organization really struggled because I think that an entrepreneurial mind would have said, well, you know, that's an obstacle and we do have to deal with it, but we can still try and find ways because we're valuable. Mm-hmm. Our services, our people, our skill sets, our knowledge is valuable, and we can provide training. We can still find ways to make this work.
Okay.
But that
Can
didn't
I
happen.
thank you? That was very informative for me.
Okay.
Any thoughts?
Just a quick question for Hakeem, just from the administration side of things. I'm learning a lot, you know, as you know, I'm learning a lot. So money flows from the, you know, cable franchise fees, you know, through your offices, and you're paying contractors. So money is flowing, you know, to the operators of these other channels, but not this channel. I'm just not quite understand why that is.
That was the
part of the
settlement agreement. That was the settlement.
Oh, there was a
that
lawsuit
yes.
involved. So, oh, I see. Okay. So it's a unique kind of a situation. Is that an ongoing, how long is the contract for you to?
The contract is a 3-year contract with 2 1-year increments, so it could be potentially 6 years, I believe. I think that's what it
I
was.
see.
I don't have it right in front of me.
And the settlement stipulates that this is the duration of the.
If we exercise all of those, that's a totality. I think it's 5. It's 5.
Yeah.
Is it 3 + 1 1?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so it could be as much as 5 years, yes. And then after that, we'd have to negotiate something else. Or
Okay.
we'd be able to negotiate something else.
Okay.
And I believe when we were negotiating the contract too, I think you had brought up that if we were doing a good job in what we were doing, that there might actually be the opportunity when it comes time for renewal to shift some of that language so that maybe there might be funding tied to it.
That, yeah, at the term, so the term of first term is
The first
3,
three.
then there's opportunity to renegotiate.
Right. So I guess my question, since you're the legal advice and you're here too, is if we are able to get the $400,000 approved for community media, and I believe the state issues an RFP for that, and we apply for it and get that, and that comes through the city, does that violate the terms of our settlement agreement? Are we gonna have to look for a different fiscal agent? Like, is that an issue?
That's a good question, I don't know.
Can we bring that up in another
Yeah.
meeting?
Okay.
Because we're running a little short,
Okay.
but
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up some of the legal history of the funding, right? And so, and to make sure the members are clear, that the IPEG or the institutional PEG fees are for capital, to support capital only. And so when you're talking about funding these contracts, these are for operations. And so those, the money is funded to the general fund. And so it is funded through a council appropriation to the city administration every year.
I see.
And so historically, that money was earmarked only for public access and local origination. And it has to do with the history of it. And I can tell you offline, it has to do with who the education access providers were in the past, TALNet, KNME, and there was a decision made amongst city government, both council and administration, that they were going to cut off the funding. And I think Councilor Garduno at one point tried to pass a resolution to fund education access, and he wasn't able to get it through. But it may have to go through council, and I can research that for you. So I'm telling you from the documents instead of this is from my memory.
sure, can we
That's a
put
good-
that on
that's
the
a
agenda
good
for
point.
next?
What's that?
Can we put that on the agenda
Sure,
for
I'll do that
next
research
month?
and I'll bring the resolutions.
Thank you.
And I would just want to add, thank you, Jane. That's important clarification that I didn't make probably earlier with you guys. When we say the department's going to go after more resources for the PEG channels, we're talking about the PEG fund, which means that's only capital and equipment. It's not operation. The money that funds GovTV comes from the general fund. That's how the city generally pays for all personnel, staff, programs, those sorts of things.
But the landscape has changed now because when council denied funding to education access, it was TALNet.
Yeah.
And it was KNME, and they figured, well, those
They're fine,
organizations
they're
have
big
money.
ones. Yeah, they're big ones, they're fine.
And also they were doing and you know, the kind of the conceptual landscape has changed too, because back in the day, education access was like distance learning and, you know, like more things that involve schools.
Right.
And so I think that when I look around the country and I see what other cities are doing, it's much more varied than that, right now. So, you know, that's good, right?
That's the
Yeah,
direction
it
we
is
wanna
good.
take out because you
Right.
need the quote unquote.
Right. And I think Sue had mentioned to me that I think in 2012 or maybe sooner, there was some $75,000 allocated to educational access, but I don't know who that was for.
By the city council.
Yeah.
Okay, let me look
But you're a
into that.
nonprofit, you can accept grants, you can produce underwriting.
That's
Um,
encouraged, you
the-
know, I mean,
the-
historically, I don't know what
Yeah.
this contract says because
It's a-
I'm not
it's allowed.
the attorney
Mhm.
for the cultural services, but when I was doing it, those alternative funding or you know, additional
Right.
funding is definitely encouraged.
Okay.
But I would think grants would be number one, foundation support would be number two, great gifts, you know, would be number three. Underwriting would be prominent. Membership's a lot of work. I just wonder about
Yeah.
membership, but that's another conversation. But, you know, thanks for the whole spin down on that.
It was very nice. Thank you for, Simon and Colleen, thank you for your comments and discussion. Okay, item 4 has 2 segments. Due to the length of time, I'm not sure that we'll be able to get to item A. However, I think we should move that, if you approve.
This
Yeah.
dense discussion.
Yep, that discussion to
Well.
the next meeting. It'll give us a chance to really
I put
jump
some
into
bare
it.
bones language in here about how the board could be an appeal board, but that's just almost a placeholder, so you know, you can give me more language and I could put it in here for next time, or
Okay.
you all too.
Yeah,
You can tell me, and then I'll put it in for discussion purposes.
I guess I defer to you on this, Brian. You know, we got this conversation started. I'd like to act on it.
Which
but-
in particular? Anything in particular on here
Well, I
that
think,
stands out?
let's put it this way. I think for both of us to, you know, given the time factor and the fact that we actually need to comb through it and look at every change, it's a pretty detailed work session.
And I would like to make a resolution, which I've talked about for many, many months, about an additional advisory position for this board, which entails internet providers and complaints to them, by them, for them, of them. Because cable, people are, streaming is not, you know, it's not just by a cable company anymore. The only thing.
Well, yeah, and then I have language here that's very bare bones also.
Right.
But it's a placeholder, and number 11 is addressed to that. Provide public education and information
I don't think
on
I have it.
matters affected by the cable television, telecommunications, communications, and information industry.
I'm sorry, do you have
Oh, it's
11?
on page 3.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
number
Yeah.
11.
So this is
Oh, so
where it
would be
broadens it out.
C11.
Yeah, number 3. Here, I'm sorry.
Oh, there we go, sorry.
And, you know, I need to do a research also to make sure there's not another board that does that, but I'm pretty sure there isn't, so I'm gonna take a look.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to make that a matter of discussion.
Okay, and
Okay.
maybe you can help me flesh that out, make it a little more meaty. you know,
Okay.
Meatier. But definitely, we have touched on that, we were trying to do a net neutrality workshop.
Yeah.
And now this thing about, well, TV, local news, that's more television oriented.
10-4.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's hard to not talk about it with the convergence of technology.
Right.
Okay, this next one is pretty cut and dry. Resolution 2001, and it's our meeting schedule. She gave us 2 options of resolutions here, identical with the exception of meets every month, meets every other month.
Right.
Here's my recommendation, it's every other month, and then with the caveat that if we really feel like we need to do it every month, then we'll make a special meeting, same time, same place.
Got the resolutions here if you'd like to. So, there's one for
And that
every
would be
other
under
month,
the-
one for every month, that's up to them.
Regular meeting, section 2.
I guess I'm on the other page.
Okay, that's all
And
right.
the reason I'm on the other page is just, there's a fair bit of change in the air.
Yes,
They're
that's
gonna, they're gonna decide which one they want.
Process, that might be discussion about. There is
Oh, okay.
this emerging advisory function that we're talking about. It just, to me, it just feels like a fair bit of change that we have to ingest, process. And, I mean, I think if we were a little more on cruise control, I'd be fine with every month.
You sold me.
I-
You sold me. It's okay. I was teeter-tottering anyway. And yeah, if we just make it every time, we might continue to have
Now, I
a
mean,
nice attendance.
a middle ground on this might be that we go through the fiscal year, through June, on that basis.
Okay.
And then consider where we're at. I mean, it's not that I think.
Right? See if.
It's hard for me to see the last half. I can see the first half.
You know what? During the summer months, sometimes it just gets to be like family, friends, events, work,
Yeah.
just tend to make us.
Yeah.
So, what do you say, through June?
I-
23rd?
I'm comfortable with that, and then we consider where we're at.
Okay. I like your idea.
I know Sue got it, you should go back.
No, wait till. Okay, Jane, here's what the board has come up with. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm listening.
Okay, what we'd like to do is revise the 01 for every month to only go through the fiscal year, basically through June,
June 2020.
the
Okay.
June 23rd, 2020.
Okay,
And then we'll revisit the meeting schedule.
so, would you like
Oh, for that?
to,
They should, yeah.
just cross it out and then sign it, so then we don't have to
Yeah.
wait another month
So,
for me to publish
so page
this?
2 is until June,
Yeah, just cross it out, and then that way I can
June
go ahead and
23rd,
publish
right
it.
here.
Let's see.
I'll put it on the webpage.
2020.
Okay, I better use it. Have you got my pen?
And
Okay.
then-
I've got a pencil and I don't think
And then we're
that's
just
too
cutting this.
appropriate.
I think that's the only change, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So right here.
We're
page
short on
2,
notes today. Thank you, Mike. I have your email address, right?
We call special meetings.
Okay, here.
Right.
Here you go. This is your pen.
Oh, thank you.
That's a nice one, thank you.
I love this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you initial yours?
Happy to.
We should probably just have, I could initial yours too. Let's just use yours. You've got it faster than I did.
You know, I like to just get the word out, and then maybe next time I'll type it, and then you can sign a new one. But,
Okay.
we'll go ahead and, publish this.
So I'd like to move that we adopt the revised meeting schedule for 2020.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes 2-0.
The other thing I've done, and we'll make it all perfect. I sound like somebody I don't like, but, so when we publish these on the webpage, the webmaster does not want me to do PDFs because it shifts the format. I don't know, he can't publish it with PDF. So what I usually do is I take the Word thing and I put signed. So if it's okay with you, I'll do that with this one, sign, and then I'll type in
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
And then next time, I'll bring in the type when you can re-sign it if you
Okay.
want, okay?
That sounds
So
good.
that way, the board will present itself in a,
Terrific.
a nice way.
That sounds good.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Here's that one.
And I am sorry that I didn't call you guys. It's just been so crazy. And I do like calling people on the phone and talking with them. And now I've learned my lesson that, we can be more efficient that way. So, and I'm sorry about not having the AV ready for you.
Yeah, no
And
problem.
then this one, we could have fixed this too.
Okay.
But, and I also announced to the board that cultural, and the audience, that cultural services will provide staff for this board in the future. I think that'll help all of us because, the more the better, if it turns out that way.
Sure.
So whenever we can.
And we get to keep Jane, but she's more of an expert. She's our expert. She is our expert.
Yeah.
So
No,
we
whenever we can
yeah.
coordinate, we'll do that. And so that will provide you all a little more, administrative support.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great.
And it also helps, Jane and I discuss, it helps bring cultural more into the conversation prior to the meetings, so we can be prepared for whatever you need from us in advance of the meeting as well, as opposed to finding it out now and then having to wait another meeting. Like I can come with that information, we can come with that information.
So one way we can do that is put, cultural services name on the webpage.
Okay.
All right, and so, but we probably need the administrative person so that the calls will go to that
Sure.
person.
I'll set up that meeting for you and I, at least.
Yeah, so we can coordinate that. Okay,
Wonderful.
that's all the administrative stuff.
Well,
I
and
have to
so,
come closer to.
what was our next meeting date?
Okay, February 25th, that's the fourth Tuesday
Right.
of every month.
Okay. Thank you. I call this meeting adjourned.
Well, excellent, 5
You're here.
minutes to the.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.